welcome to all of you. We're very happy, I'm very happy and honored to be here moderating this highly qualified and interesting round table. Well, it's not exactly round, but it's a podium discussion for sure. My name is Edouard Gaudot. I'm a guest professor at the ESSEC, Irene. I'm also a writer, a professor, and a consultant. And I know Europe because I worked there in the European Parliament for more than 10 years as a political advisor for a political group. But more dearer to my heart, I've learned Europe in Warsaw with a great European who is now passed away, but who was instrumental in toppling the Soviet rule on Poland, Bronisław Geremek, one of the advisors of Lech Wałęsa, because this is how it's said. And every time I'm talking about Europe, whether in my classes or with my friends or within the public debate, I am always reminded how distant for the French imaginary and the Western European imaginary our eastern flank is. With Geremek and in the College of Europe in Warsaw, I learned that what we call Eastern Europe is not Eastern at all, it's Central Europe. And actually, if you read Bernard Droz's, Jacques Droz's, sorry, his father, Jacques Droz's History of the Middle Europa, you realize that this is what Europe is, this long, wide, flat land between the Vosges and the Volga. And most of the time, it is quite difficult to have a representation of Europe when you sit on one of its edges. And I must say, I'm very happy that today we're going to delve a little bit more deeper into the European flesh by considering how strategic its eastern flank has become, even for France, even for Ireland, the neutral country, even for Portugal. These are the three questions that I will put in the discussion. We'll start also by reflecting on how far east is the war in Ukraine, a war at our border, which is raising a lot of controversies in the public space, and especially in France. The second thing is how come that the great game, or let's say that the strategic stakes of this 21st century for Europe are less played on the great oceans of Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean or even Indian Ocean, and more on our very bordering seas, the Baltic Sea, that is now becoming a NATO lake, the Black Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, because a lot of it's a theater of operations also that sometimes gets overlooked, although not from the French point of view for once. And the third thing is, of course, the most prospective aspect that we can have. The question is, what can Europe and the European Union, because those two concepts overlap but are not exactly the same, what can Europe do when it comes to enhancing and assuming its own security and the security of its friends? We come from a political entity that has chosen in 1945 to consider the other people as friends and not foes, as allies and partners and not enemies. That brings us also a different perspective on strategic alliances and strategic stakes. And to explore these three dimensions and this reflection on the eastern flank, I am very happy to welcome online and on the flesh four distinguished panelists that I'm going to briefly introduce before I give them the floor. To my right, Irina Zidaru, who is a Director General for Strategic Affairs at the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To her right, Major General but retired, Paul Hurmuz, who is heading also the New Strategy Forum and Senior Associate Expert in military affairs. And should join us online, Yordan Bozhilov, who is the founder and president of the Sofia Security Forum. And last but not least, to my left, Nicolas Tenzer, civil servant, French, and president of the Centre d'études et de réflexion pour l'action politique, and author of a book called Notre, which will be the opportunity at the end of this session to be discussed, because we will have his Ukrainian publisher, Constantin Sigov, joining us also online to have a few words on this initiative. But, all right, we plan and God laughs. I wanted to start with our Bulgarian guest, but apparently he's not online yet. Am I correct? All right. Paul, would you like to do us the honor to start and set the scene for this very important situation? Thank you very much for your flexibility.
After so many years in the military, if you're not prepared,
well, as the British say, you can be caught with your pants on your ankles.
Thank you very much, Edouard. I think I have to try to make my presentation available. Yep, looks like it's there. Perfect. So, thank you for being here. NATO is facing a complex, volatile and unpredictable security environment in the Black Sea, which combines armed conflict of Russia against Ukraine, frozen conflicts, aggressive action by Russia using hybrid warfare, violation of the principle of freedom of navigation, attacks on civilian infrastructure, and many others that put peace and security at serious and imminent threat. This is just to give you a worldview from a Black Sea perspective. The article of Bruce Jackson and late Ronald Asmus, published in June 2004, described the wider Black Sea region as the Bermuda Triangle of the Western strategic thinking. Others have called the Black Sea an inhospitable sea or a geopolitical gray zone. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges used the title The Black Sea or the Black Hole in his study from January 2021. Now, coming back to the security challenges in the Black Sea, Russia has clearly demonstrated that it is ready to further escalate the tension in the Black Sea, including by direct threats to assets and territories of NATO member states. The future trajectory of Russian federations remains shady, plagued by hostility and expansionist aims. This dilemma is amplified by the fact that even if the Russian ground forces suffered big losses in Ukraine, its strategic forces still remain strong. Likewise, Russian air, naval, and cyber capabilities are still largely unaffected and able to project power, exercise coercion, and support hybrid operations. Russia uses militaristic rhetoric against NATO member states, including threats to use nuclear weapons. According to General Christopher Cavoli, Russia's primary focus is on development of 6 specific systems: a nuclear-powered cruise missile, a nuclear-armed hypersonic boost glide vehicle, a more capable heavy intercontinental ballistic missile, Sarmat, a nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered underwater drone, Poseidon, hypersonic cruise missiles, and lasers. These weapons could provide Russia asymmetric threats to NATO and present new challenges to Western response options, according to General Cavoli. The Russian Federation effectively employs a diverse array of non-military strategies to complement its military capabilities, including disinformation, propaganda, cyber attacks, coercive use of political, economic, energy, information, and other hybrid tactics. The Russian intelligence and security services play a central role in this respect. This is a very comprehensive picture of the Russian disinformation and propaganda ecosystem as part of the hybrid warfare machinery. This is a very comprehensive, this is an accurate description made by Dr. Mark Galeotti, an expert in Russian intelligence and security affairs. The deployment of secret services, information warfare, and assassinations is deeply embedded in Russia's political DNA, as stated by Sir Richard Dearlove, former director of MI6. In enhancing its influence in the region, Russia has made full use of the protracted conflicts through its ability to escalate or de-escalate the situation according to its interest. The Black Sea is home to several critical pipelines and will soon host new energy projects, such as an underwater electric cable from Azerbaijan to Romania, and the exploitation of offshore gas resources from Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. In 2027, Romania will become the largest gas producer in the EU for at least a decade, when the exploitation of the Neptune Deep perimeter will start. All this project may be subject to Russian hybrid interference. Energy security remains tied to Russia's activity in the Black Sea, with its action in the exclusive economic zone of other countries that can seriously threaten the exploration or extraction of gas. This could further complicate the security environment in the region. Accidents have caused damage to the cables in the past and quite recently, and stepped-up naval activity in the region could raise the risk of vessels accidentally cutting the lines lying on the seafloor. Furthermore, Russia has been investing in capabilities that could allow specialized submarines to place explosives on the seafloor, physically endangering underwater critical infrastructure. In addition to the Russian Navy, the main Directorate of Deep Sea Research, GUCI, also known as Russia Deep Sea Spetsnaz, can undertake covert operation along the seabed. The Russian war against Ukraine affects negatively not only peace and stability in the region, but has also far-reaching destructive implications in critical areas. Also, on 13 August 2023, a warship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet executed a board and search operation of a Turkish freighter that was passing through Bulgaria's exclusive economic zone. The end of the grain deal raised the prospects of direct NATO-Russia confrontation in the Black Sea. Russia's massive attacks on Ukrainian port infrastructure made it clear that Russia was prepared to take more risks. These strikes along the Danube in close proximity to Romanian territory presents a real and present danger of accidentally hits on NATO territory. There are also many other associated risks and threats in the region. The drifting mines, 114 until now, pose a significant danger for ships and the critical infrastructure in the Black Sea. There has been an extensive use of drone attacks in the Black Sea. The use of drones at longer and longer range increases the risk of accidents or miscalculation, which could impact non-Russian assets, ships, oil, and gas infrastructure. All these are multiplied in an intensive electronic warfare environment, including the GPS jamming. Here are some of the main proposals of the study: NATO's role in addressing security threats and challenges in the Black Sea. Time for a comprehensive strategic approach to the region, a project jointly developed by the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies from Turkey, Sofia Security Forum from Bulgaria, and New Strategy Center from Romania. And the ambitious plan of actions of the recent study, The Battle for the Black Sea is Not Over, developed by New Strategy Center and Hudson Institute from USA. So, what is the way ahead? We just listened this morning about regional initiatives. And here on the slide, there are some other examples. Our authoritarian rivals see the strategic context as a continuous struggle in which non-military and military instruments are used unconstrained by any distinction between peace and war. Their strategy of political warfare is designed to undermine cohesion, erode economic, political, and social resilience, and to compete for strategic advantage. These attacks on our way of life from assertive authoritarian rivals and extremist ideologies are difficult to defeat without undermining the very freedoms we want to protect. Their way of warfare is strategic, synchronized, and systematic. That's why cohesion, trust, shared values, social habits, and behavior all form vital lines of defense against our adversaries' attack on our societies and decision-making. On the new battlefield, assuring societal resilience constitutes deterrence by denial. And some wildcards? And conclusion. So the world we live in, it's highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I will rate you with the 5 hypothetical developments according to the Global Strategy Trends out to 2055, published in September last year by the UK MOD. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paul, also for this capacity to pack so much information in so little time. Thank you very much. I am now very pleased to introduce someone whose connection was a challenge, but successful. We have online Yordan Bozhilov from Bulgaria, who should be appearing. Welcome, Yordan. You have the floor. You have been introduced already, so I suppose that we can jump into the waters now.
OK, merci. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Je commence en français pour souligner le fait que la Bulgarie est membre de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie. And of course, Bulgaria and France share strong historical and cultural connections. And today, both countries collaborate strongly within NATO and EU to support Ukraine and reinforce European security. And French companies play a significant role in modernization of Bulgarian army. Let me focus on the eastern flank, as it is the topic of our panel. I would like to give you my assessment and present a kind of a broader picture of the eastern, so-called eastern flank. We have to take into account that there are similarities between the countries, but there are also differences on many issues. And the countries share, of course, geographical proximity to Russia. They have common history of being former members of the Warsaw Pact. Although they meet or even exceed NATO 2% GDP defense spending pledge, most have relatively small armies and outdated equipment. Poland is a notable exception, maintaining substantial and well-funded military. But to the credit of all these countries, all they implement ambitious modernization programs. The eastern flank countries differs in their assessment to the threat posed by Russia. Countries like Poland and Baltic states perceive Russia as an existential threat, while Bulgaria and Romania primarily encounter hybrid threats. And Hungary and Slovakia hold different views on Russia compared to other European nations. Perceptions of threat and responses to threats differs among eastern flank countries. This is shaped by geography, history, cultural ties, economic relations, trade, energy, and many others. Additionally, hybrid warfare, propaganda, misinformation significantly influence public opinion. States which are geographically closer to Russia naturally perceive risk much higher. But again, the threat perception differs from country to country. And let me give you an example with my own country. Historically, Bulgaria regained its independence from Ottoman Empire in 19th century as a result of the Russia-Turkish wars. And consequently, significant portion of Bulgarians maintain positive views towards Russia, which, from its part, of course, influence domestic politics. Nevertheless, Bulgarian society remains predominantly pro-European, and major political parties consistently support EU's unity and its policy towards Russia and, of course, backing Ukraine. Increasingly, the change of the US administration has affected political dynamics in Bulgaria and other countries to the eastern flank. While no direct United States interference occurs, interpretation by local politicians have led to more vocal anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian and anti-European rhetoric from some political circles. But when it comes to the role of the United States in the European security in defense, politicians are very cautious to give assessments. The signals from the United States have been too sudden and volatile to prompt a serious reassessment of the transatlantic relations. That is why Bulgarian politicians, unlike their counterparts in the eastern flank countries, generally maintain moderate position of the future of the relations with the United States and about NATO. Until recently, eastern flank countries prioritized collective security and strongly relied on NATO guarantees for their territorial defense. Additionally, Poland, Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria have actively pursued enhanced defense cooperation with the United States. And countries most concerned about the Russian threat view bilateral ties with Russia as essential guarantees. Definitely, the current shift within Euro-Atlantic relations have created uncertainty regarding the nature of American engagement with Europe. Signals from Washington suggest a preference for bilateral relationship rather than collective NATO commitment, if correctly understood. This raises two critical questions. Can credible bilateral guarantees against threat from Russia exist outside NATO? And second, could individual bilateral agreements potentially weaken Europe's unified response? To me, credible US commitments outside NATO to Europe or individual European countries seems unlikely, given NATO's comprehensive security framework. Bilateral arrangements alone are unlikely to provide equal assurances. The most significant risk is the fragmentation of security guarantees, dividing states based on their size, strength, or defense spending. The leading principle must be that the security guarantees have to be equal for all member states. Evidently, European countries may take greater responsibility for the continent's defense. But again, the question comes on how European defense will evolve, on which principle it will be based on. We have to discuss and decide on these issues. It can be potentially under EU umbrella or based on additional security arrangements or as a pillar of NATO. The answers to this question will give us a picture of the future European defense, including the role of the individual countries and decision-making processes. I would say that involvement of nations like United Kingdom in Turkey is critical, but they are both not EU members. What will be the modalities of their participation in the future European security and defense? Question mark. I believe that majority of the eastern flank countries would support the idea of developing European defense within NATO, but with much stronger role of European countries. I hope it is not a wishful thinking, as there are still many questions about the US commitment, the unity of the alliance, having in mind peculiar position of some countries. But it seems this approach reflects the general view of the majority of the countries to the eastern flank, particularly with regard to the perceived threat from Russia. The war in Ukraine and Russia's imperial ambitions reinforce their view for strong collective security guarantees. And Russia is unlikely to relinquish its ambition to reshape Europe, European and global security. Europe must therefore be prepared to effectively counter these threats, preventing Russia from establishing new sphere of influence reminiscent of the new Yalta Agreement. And my last point, is that the countries to the eastern flank shall participate in decisions about any defense and security arrangements, as they are the first target of Russia. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Yordan. It's good that you are connected and you can stay also for the rest of the debate. There might be questions also from the audience directed to you, especially on the questions that you raised and only dotted way answered. I'm quite stricken by this, by those two first elements that you put on the table. Basically, what seems to be one of the most pressing issues is a shared, common, strategic culture at European level. We don't really have that for many obvious historical and geographical reasons. And I recall a very famous politician in this country asking if we knew any Lithuanians. Well, some of us, like me, happen to know some Lithuanians who do not sleep very well and haven't been sleeping very well for the past 3 years. So that's something that maybe needs to be emphasized a lot. I would like to give the floor now to Irina for a more institutional and also a more, how should I say, structural reflection on this strategic stakes. Please.
Thank you very much. I would start by saying that we are all here because we share the same perception of the threats and of the risks. And as far as Romania is concerned, we share the threat of the perception of the threat coming from the Russian Federation. And this is why we have put in place together with Poland a decade ago the format which is called Bucharest 9, the B9. And on the eve of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, we have had the honor to have the French foreign minister visiting Bucharest to join us for a ministerial meeting of this format. With that being said, I would also like to add that I think that we are also here because Russia has a plan, and this plan is called Novorossiya. Novorossiya means grabbing the whole northern shore of the Black Sea and making happen a worst-case scenario for Romania, for NATO, and for the EU, of course, not to mention the eastern flank. And that worst-case scenario will mean that for the first time in almost 35 years, we will also border once again the Russian Federation. And imagine here, in this new strategic configuration in Europe at the Euro-Atlantic level, what means bordering the Russian Federation and having the Russian Federation at the mouth of the Danube. With this in mind, I think we have to focus on two things. First of all, the fact that there is a high need and a high demand for identifying the most appropriate solution to the war in Ukraine. And Europe has spared no effort in this respect, starting with the summit meeting in London two weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, and of course continuing with the extraordinary European Council. I think that the European Union must have a say in these discussions. The countries which are neighboring the EU member states and NATO allies neighboring Ukraine and sharing the same threat perception with Ukraine must have a say in what lies ahead when it comes to the solution. And also we have to keep in mind that this solution is about two things. It is about the future of the European security, and it is also about shaping up the much needed burden sharing when it comes to the security and defense dimension of the European Union. And I would also like to add that for those of us who think that it will be Novorossiya and that would be all, I fear that would be just the first step towards a more dangerous plan, which is called the Eurasian system of security. which has been enshrined both in a semi-official way, but also at ideological way, but by famous pundits in Moscow. Now let us think about what happened on the eastern flank since Russia started the war against Ukraine. First of all, we have had a considerable number of summit meetings, both at EU level and at NATO level, deciding for the consolidation of the eastern flank from the Baltic to the Black Sea. That means, in practical terms, putting in place both the battle groups and also going ahead with the regional plans. On the battle groups, I would like to thank France for being the framework nation in Romania at the battle group we are hosting, and also thanking the other allies which have been supporting us from the very first days of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We are doing the same thing in supporting, contributing to air policing in the Baltic states, and this is something which is going on from Romanian point of view from the very first day of our membership in NATO. The other thing which is related to the eastern flank these days, and keeping in mind the fact that we will be needing a backstop force and a presence in order to consolidate peace which is to be achieved hopefully in Ukraine, that by no means should mean that what has been achieved in terms of the Allied presence of the eastern flank must be somehow thought on and thought about. We have to consolidate, to go ahead with the consolidation of the Allied presence on the eastern flank with prepositioning of troops, with exercises, basically going ahead with what has been already decided. There is something extremely important which has been touched upon extensively in the presentation by General Hurmuz, which is the Black Sea, which remains one of the most important places, if not the epicenter of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Let us not forget that one of the first actions that Russian Federation took was seizing the island of Serpents, which thankfully was was recuperated by the Ukrainian forces. At the same time, let us not forget that one of the first signals that Russia is extremely resolute when it comes to the Black Sea came before the war. That happened in June and July 2021 when Russia staged two so-called incidents in the Black Sea involving a British frigate and a Dutch frigate. And then the incidents have been happening in each and every year, starting from irresponsible engaging Allied aircraft, but also tampering with civilian aircraft, such as the Polish aircraft, which was performing a Frontex mission in the Black Sea in March 2023. That would be just one side of the affairs. The other one is consisting in the fact that the Russian aggression and the capabilities either received the license in order to produce them from Iran are causing incidents both on Romanian soil but also in our airspace. We had over 40 incidents of that kind since the war started. Against this background, and despite of this, Romania put in place, together with Bulgaria and Turkey in the Black Sea, a mechanism actually dedicated to counter the threats of the mines. It is already the second year of this mechanism acting. Non-riparian allies from NATO states are welcomed and are present in these activations, in these activation missions. Not least, I would like to remind you that Romania brought a considerable and consistent contribution to facilitating the transport of Ukrainian crops towards the Middle East and North Africa, like over 2/3 of the whole quantity of Ukrainian grains transiting, reaching these external markets, transited to Romania. I would stop here. I think it would be useful to answer the questions.
Thank you very, very much. Sorry, I'm also attending to some technicalities. Thank you also for putting back in the discussion the ideological dimension of those conflicts. Because as you mentioned Eurasian, but you could have mentioned also two figures that are sometimes part of the discussion, such as Limonov, who's been also the subject of a very interesting book and very interesting movie recently. Also Alexander Dugin, who recently said that the West is dead. The ideological dimension of the conflicts is also a predominant aspect. We tend to think a little bit too quickly that wars are only fought by soldiers and tanks on the ground. It is actually something that is also fought in the heads. And the fact that there is a support or not for an engagement, or support or not for an ally, that is also something that matters. Nicolas, you happen to know a lot about that, so I'm really happy to give you the floor on that.
Thank you, Edouard. Well, first of all, I think you had a questions about the very nature of Europe and about, what the Eastern and Central European countries could teach us. Basically, I think that they had, or they still have, a consciousness that we don't have in the Western Europe. They had the consciousness of the war, they had the consciousness of the fight against a totalitarian regime. They had the consciousness also of, I will say, the time. Because if you ask, many of our colleagues and friends, in Central and Eastern Europe, they often said that they were basically witnessing the end of World War II, not in 1945, but in 1989 or 1991, depending on the countries. And I think that's quite important to have, that means this perception of time. And right now for the Ukrainians, the end of the long war, in a way, will be only when Ukraine will be fully liberated from Russian yoke and from Russian troops. That will be the end of it. When Moldova will welcome EU member states. When Belarus, freed from his dictator, Lukashenko, will be also European member states. When Armenia, maybe, will join us, etc., etc. And I think, and same for Georgia, of course, etc. But I think that we must have this long-term view, and in fact, we've lost in the West this kind of consciousness. We've lost also in the West, and especially, I will say, in France and Germany, the value of what Milan Kundera used to call the small nations. And the reality of the small nations, of the Eastern and European, Central and Eastern European countries, basically say something else about also what is no longer the great powers politics, but which is, the reality of the geostrategic challenges of today. And the geostrategic challenge of today, and I will say even more when after Trump came back to the White House, is that basically we have to fight against the grip of those called great powers. We have to free our own perception of foreign policy from the idea that only the great powers matter. And I think that's why, also when it comes to the destiny of European countries, we have certainly to ally with other middle-sized powers around the world. Just take an example, Japan, South Korea, a very important nation, country, and state, everything together, Taiwan, and also certainly Australia, New Zealand, etc., and many others also in Africa, maybe in Latin America as well. And I think that's quite important to have this perception of what Europe could do. It has certainly to broaden its own alliances with like-minded countries in a fight in my view, that encapsulates also the very nature of Europe's destiny, which is a fight for the rule of law, for international law. And that's why also in this fight, Ukraine matters. You were talking just before about, the ideological dimension of Russia's war against Ukraine. And in fact, what Russia aims at doing is to fully destroy, erase the rule of law. When Russia, in plain sight, committed already 25 years ago in Chechnya, 17 years ago in Georgia, 10 years ago and after in Syria, crimes against humanity, war crimes, crime of aggression, and in Ukraine, crime of genocide as well. It attempts to show to the world, well, we can do that without any kind of serious answer or retaliations. And I think that's the principles that we have to stand for. And when we see also a guy in the White House right now who has absolutely no interest of any kind for international law, who is just equaling the victim and the culprit, the aggressor and the attacked country, and who is, beyond anything else, siding with the criminal power, we see exactly what exactly is at stake in Europe. And from this perspective, I think that's quite important as well, especially right now, because we are witnessing a kind of surge of Russian narratives invading not only the public opinion, the public mind, but also the soul of our own leaders, to refuse the words that we see in the press, we see in the speeches of peace talks, negotiations, compromises with a power such as Russia. Russia is waging a total war, a war of extermination. And we have certainly to defeat Russia. That must be clearly our war aim, whatever it takes. And I think it's important to have this perception. Just imagine that we accept that Russia, at the end of the day, still maintains its grips on Ukrainian occupied territories in Crimea, in Donbas regions, Kherson regions, Zaporizhzhia regions. What does it mean? We know what happens, in those territories. Each and every day, day after day, massive collective rapes, torture, summary executions, deportation of children, which is a crime of genocide under the conventions of December 9th, 1948 on the repression and prevention of the crime of genocide. So basically, could we accept that we give right now to Mr. Putin and to the Russians a license to kill? And I think that we have, when we are talking about, reframing Europe, reframing the very nature of Europe, the credibility of Europe, the legitimacy of Europe, I think we have certainly to think, just to think, about those basic things. Hannah Arendt used to say that what creates the possibility of evil is the life without thought. And I think that we are at the right moment where we have just to think of the meaning of things. We must not accept that the kind of cognitive difference, yes, we cannot accept Russia is committing all crimes, but, well, at the end of the day, we know there will be negotiation with Russia because, well, we must be realistic, etc. No, it's not realism. And we perfectly know that if we accept any kind of compromises with Russia, not only Russia will rearm and certainly create more crimes in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Georgia, in Africa and elsewhere, but that we in Europe will be the next in the list. So we have no choice. We have no choice, and basically we can just hope that we are not entering into a leaderless world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for reminding us that the might of its enemy is also a proof of the quality of the project. And when you see the enemies of the European Union and of Europe today, well, the alignment is paying tribute to the ambition of the project. And as you said, the project is to replace the rule of might by the rule of law. And now we are witnessing a surge of admiration and demand of radicality and demand for the rule of might, the rule of the powerful. This is exactly un-European, I should say. And Europe knows that very well because it's been practicing the rule of might for way too long to not have learned the historical lessons that is behind. When it comes to the public opinions, I did a quick survey before this panel, and I noticed something quite interesting that says a lot about the internal position within our countries. Portugal and Ireland are two societies that support very much the EU engagement behind Ukraine and the European Union actions in it, 70 to 80%. Other countries, such as Croatia, are extremely divided. The head of state is against, is pro-Russian, and the head of the government is pro-European engagement. But when you come to big countries such as Italy or Spain, you can see a slight majority in settling it for peace now, even at the loss of territorial integrity in Ukraine. And that says a lot, not about just the public opinion, it says a lot about the institutions and the political debate within our countries. And I'm not even getting on the situation on the eastern flank.